we've seen today is a side opposition who believes that making our lives easier is connected to ignorance. But what we see on side government is that ignorance has become is becoming a very big problem in our society, so much so that is harming our children, and that's what I'm going to argue today. So before I begin my constructive speech, I'm going to start by refuting what we've heard from side opposition. The first main contention of this debate was with our terms. They brought up the important technological devices such as dialysis and tsunami warning systems. But what we're here to tell you is that what we have already conceded to on side government is that there are benefits to technology. However, there are certain technological devices and certain aspects of technology that make our society ignorant, and these far outweigh those small benefits. The other thing we heard is the side opposition speaker refuted my partner's points about social skills and really said that people who are shy will shy away anyways, regardless of the presence of computers and technology. But what we see on side government is that this problem is exacerbated by technology. Instead of at one point only having the opportunity to be at home and addicted to your TV, glued to your television screen, we can see that instead of talking to someone on the subway or the bus and making conversation, you have the opportunity to sit on your phone and play 2048. You have a 24/7 capability to isolate yourself from the rest of society, and this is what we see as breeding ignorance today. The second point they refuted was about the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge and how that this is not what they consider disengagement, but it is. How many of those people knew what it was like to have ALS? How many of those people knew what the actual impacts of ALS was? Not many. And that's what we see as ignorant in this debate. This is what we see as ignorant in social media, that they don't actually have the entire knowledge, and so that's how these computers are breeding ignorance, and that's why this is a prime example in this debate.
The only people who can know what having ALS is like are people with ALS. Just because these people don't have the disease doesn't mean they're like disengaged or unaware. When they're raising far more money than they ever did before for ALS, that's a great thing.
Yes, but the question in this debate is not whether that they're raising money. It's whether the people who are generating that money truly understand what it's about, and that's what we define ignorance as, is being disengaged from the actual issues. And if they don't know the issues surrounding ALS, how are they being informed? They're being ignorant. Now, I'm now going to refute what the first opposition speaker brought up. And he talked about individualized education. And what we would like to pose on side government for the opposition team is that do computers actually provide enough education? What we've seen in the United States is a dire education system. What we see is that literacy rates are plummeting. The US's math skills are only 23rd in the world. What we see is that there's this decline in education, and while the top tier remains the same or improves, there's a bottom tier that is bringing the US down. And that's what we see as a problem. And these computers clearly have not improved this. They haven't made the education system in places like the US better, and that's why we see this as ignorance and not beneficial. He also brought up about how it provides info, and in a nanosecond you can be on BBC. But actually, what we see is that news channels are just trying to improve ratings. CNN constantly covers MH177, the flight that crashed, and what they do is instead of actually covering pressing stories like Ebola and how we can protect ourselves, they're on that instantaneous newscast that's going to bump their ratings, and that is what we see as ignorance, is they're not focusing on very important issues. They're focusing on one thing that's going to boost the ratings, and that's what we see as ignorance in this time. Then the second point they brought up was about scientific development. That was the main thing we saw in their speech. And really what we heard about this was how it makes their lives easier. But they didn't connect this to ignorance. And so we see that this point truly falls as it is not relevant to this debate. Now I'm going to go on to my constructive speech and really elaborate on what my partner said about disengagement. At one point in time, families sat around for the dinner table and they watched TV, they watched the news, the nightly news, the 6 o'clock news. Now I want all of you in this room to think about that right now. How many of you actually go home and watch the 6 o'clock news? Not likely very many. You have so many activities. You have so many other sources. You don't do this. And so you get your news from Facebook. And so we see that this is a point of disengagement. That instead of actually watching the news, these people are doing other things. Maybe they're on Facebook or sending an email during dinner. And this is what we see as disengagement and a difference between now and before. Yes.
Aren't televisions part of the technological devices that you were talking about?
But what we see is that the news has shifted between these two time points. The news once was focused on local issues or pressing issues, whereas the news has shifted more to be on what's popular. And that's really what I'm going to get into in my second point, is that this ignorance of world issues has really been exacerbated by technology. Because sites like Reddit or companies like CNN, what they focus on is on showing the most popular story. They don't focus on what's important. So Reddit, it's a website that tracks what's popular, and people will click to say a story is more popular. So while the spread of Ebola right now is pressing, a story about Miley Cyrus and her latest thing may be pushed up, and we see that this is how teens are getting their news sources. And we see this is a problem because people are ignorant. They're not looking at many sources for their news, and they're looking at sites like this which rate it by popularity. Or they're looking at seemingly reputable sources like CNN, who are in actuality just trying to boost the ratings and going on what's popular at that instant. And so what we see is that computers have enabled this ignorance. What they've done is they've allowed us to watch these shows that are seemingly reputable or go on these websites. But in actuality, the problem with these websites is that they're based on what's popular and not what's important. And so the ignorance by computers is because it's not fact. Most of it isn't fact-based. In fact, 60 Minutes recently had a problem with facts and fact-checking. So even what may seem beneficial actually breeds ignorance. So what have we told you today? Well, although we agree that computers are beneficial, we see that using these technological devices, using computers, breeds ignorance because of the vast array of news sources that aren't reputable and based on popularity, and therefore have created a society that is more focused on popularity than actual facts. Thank you.